There are more than 344,000 clinical trials in the U.S. and in more than 200 other countries. These clinical trials are all different, of course, but they have one goal in common: to be as productive as they can possibly be. Welcome to Episode 3 of CTO, the Clinical Trial Optimization Podcast. CTO is a twice-monthly podcast that brings together clinical research stakeholders to exchange ideas, share knowledge, and think creatively about how to oversee, manage, and optimize clinical trial planning and execution. The podcast includes discussions with clinical research, industry thought leaders, and practitioners about how the industry is transforming clinical research design and operations to speed up the delivery of life-changing therapies. I'm your host, Linda Sullivan, and I want to thank you for joining me on this exciting journey to raise the bar on clinical trials and provide an interactive forum for discussing what we do professionally every day of our lives. We hope you'll subscribe to CTO on your favorite podcast platform so you'll automatically get every episode in your feed for free. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the role of risk-based quality management in clinical research. I'm joined today by two guests, the founder and CEO of Syntegrity, Artem Andrianov, and his colleague, Chief Scientific Officer Johann Proeve. So let me introduce you to them. First, let's meet Artem. Artem serves as CEO of Syntegrity, a company that he started in 2013. He graduated with PhD in mathematical modeling and Masters of Business Administration, and his life passion is to conduct safer and more efficient clinical trials, improve clinical research with risk-based quality management, and drive the concepts of RBQM to new frontiers. His nearly 20 years of experience in data quality projects, RBQM, and biostatistics provide him with the expertise needed to achieve his goals. So welcome to CTO, Artem.
Thank you, Linda. I'm happy to join you.
Great. And now I want to bring in Johann Proeve. Johann has 35 plus years of experience in global data management head at Bayer, and he joined Syntegrity in 2015, where he now serves as Chief Scientific Officer. Welcome to CTO, Johann.
Thank you very much, Linda.
So I did a brief introduction, but you guys have some really great background and experience that I think provides the context for what you're doing at Syntegrity and why you started the company. So Artem, why don't you tell us a little bit more about some of the background and experience that really led you to want to start the company, Syntegrity?
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Linda, it was many years ago when I was part of a large organization responsible for accumulating the data for various clinical trials. And my team and I, we were analyzing clinical trials actually on a daily basis. Already that days, we have noticed different problems, in fact, different misconducts. When we were presenting this information to top management, quite commonly we were hearing arguments like, we cannot share this with sponsors, we cannot share this with CROs, this is not clinically significant, or this is actually too large issues to share because we will lose our reputation. So it became obvious for me that days that there is certainly conflict of interest if you're part of the process to analyze the risks, analyze the performance. And that's why many years ago, my team and I, we exited and formed an independent data quality bureau, which we named Syntegrity. In fact, it's clinical integrity, as you might infer. We wanted to provide this kind of service independently, so without conflict of interests. Since that time, it has been evolving actually into something bigger. Currently, RBQM, or risk-based quality management, becomes a really large topic. I believe it's a new market which forms now in the pharma industry. And we are happy to say that there is a kind of already ecosystem which becomes very useful for many pharma companies. And the biggest joy to observe how it's evolving is, in fact, that we see that we can de-risk clinical trials by sharing this information across pharma companies. So our big vision is to create something like Bloomberg for pharma.
Well, certainly you started Syntegrity before ICHE6R2 Section 5 came out.
Absolutely, yeah. We were not even aware that regulations will support this direction so much. We just were observing the data and were looking at it and getting some impression that 20-30% of data were kind of dirty data out of clinical trials. And I'm speaking with about really large organizations who are paying a lot of money for this data. And already that days we were considering, okay, something really wrong. So we need to bring this information back to sponsors because, in fact, that will be very much beneficial for them to understand what kind of quality they get in for their money. So, in fact, that's actually where more intrinsic or kind of internal desire just to improve the situation, just to improve the world.
Very interesting. So, Johann, you certainly had quite a career at Bayer. What made you decide after all that time to throw your hat in something brand new with a startup and make the leap over to Syntegrity?
Actually, Linda, that was just a matter of age because I reached my retirement age, but I wasn't ready for it. And then Artem approached me and we had a brief discussion, and Artem had solutions available, at least theoretically, solutions available that I would have loved to have in place while running the global data management organization at Bayer. Things like, how do you detect duplicate patients? And that was something, that I always struggled with in my life as data manager. And then, I thought Syntegrity seems to be the right company to join and help Artem and help the rest of the data management organizations in the industry.
Well, you certainly have a lot of energy for somebody that was heading for retirement. I know you're quite busy with what you're doing now. It sounds like the two of you have brought some really good background and experience into this, what at the time was a new and growing organization. What types of services does the organization provide right now to help organizations in the planning and execution of clinical research? Maybe Artem, you want to take that?
So mostly we are now focused on bringing technology in place to enable the RBQM, enabling it from end to end. So having it from phase of planning towards execution of clinical study, operational phase, and then even to up to the report writing. It's easy to say than to make. And in fact, this workflow, what I'm talking about, was originally introduced to us by Dr. Beat Wiedler, who was previously head of quality at Roche. And he first said to us when, he was one of the first initial product manager for Syntegrity's SaaS product. And he initially said to us, so Artem, please don't repeat the mistake many companies are doing. So do not provide a kind of silo solution for some element of quality management. So the real key to build a successful product, which is very useful for customers, in fact, has to have an end-to-end offer with interlinkage in between. Meaning that you have the full traceability in the process, in the procedure. So, for example, if we're talking about risk mitigation action, a risk indicator, quality tolerance limits, they all should be interlinked with each other. But move forward, issue management, corrective actions, preventive actions, all these elements ideally should be interlinked and interconnected. That would allow to pharma company to reach a completely new level of efficiency and ask and answer the questions which were impossible to answer before. For example, what are the root causes most commonly happen within an organization? What are preventive actions are most efficient, most cost efficient, and most efficient reducing the risks? What mitigation actions the most efficient ones? So these kind of questions was near to impossible to answer before. Now we are step by step coming to the situation where there is a possibility to answer it globally, even for the whole industry. For example, unifying different risks that are happening within pharma, making them standardized, the same as risk indicators, making them standardized, how to detect different risks, how to detect them in advance, how to detect them like so early before even they happen. What methods should be used for that? So how to standardize the mitigation actions, for example. So all these possibilities or all these measures become possible when many companies are on board, and there is a kind of environment where everybody's aiming to become safe for patient and predictable in their success.
So I want to follow up on that comment that you made about having to create a solution that sort of broke through those silos. Mm-hmm. And I know from some of your early products, part of what you were focusing on was how do you get access to data that sits in different places? Do you want to expand a little bit on sort of when you think about how do you break down these silos and barriers? Some of it it's not just departments, but it's also where that data sits.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. In fact, pharma has, to my mind, even still till now, a large problem, in fact, or disease sitting isolated from each other. So it's not about the data only, but as you correctly said, departments are not speaking with other departments. So enabling the communication is a great challenge between them, enabling linkage. When we first suggested to involve, for example, medical reviewers in their risk endeavor, we were considered like somebody really crazy. When we started to speak, okay, let's involve CRAs, let's involve sites. And now we are talking about involving patients into quality management of clinical trials. And many pharma companies still considering this as extremely innovative. So you all correctly said there are silos everywhere. This is the first point. So the data is isolated as well. Safety is not connected more or less with trial management data or with lab data, with imaging. So all that gets kind of packed in different buckets. Now, in my understanding, pharma comes to a third revolution where we should start speaking about getting the data, getting the knowledge out of the data. So the first revolution when the pharma started the clinical trials with paper. Second was when we started to accumulate it with EDC. And the third evolution, now we need to convert the data into the knowledge. So in order to make it happen, the silos needs to be broken. So how Syntegrity approaches that is we build a neural network, in fact, out of clinical trial. We connect to APIs of different recording systems and process, in fact, put kind of sensors around and process the data from three main standpoints. So what is the quality? How good is performance? And what are the risks?
That's great. Thank you. Well, we're going to take a short break so I can tell you a little bit about the upcoming MCC Clinical Trial Summit. And when we return, Johann, let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing as you work with your customers and how the COVID pandemic is impacting the types of services that your customers are looking for. If you've enjoyed this discussion so far, please join us at the MCC Clinical Trial Risk and Performance Management Virtual Summit, taking place September 8 through 10, 2020. We've taken our successful face-to-face summit format and completely retooled it to deliver a unique, engaging, interactive multimedia experience. Beginning on August 26th, you'll have access to pre-recorded case study presentations about quality by design and RBQM topics. Additionally, industry experts will share insights about vendor management and site oversight. Then, on September 8th, you'll move to the 3-day virtual live portion of the summit. FDA keynote speaker, Dr. Jean Melinda, Senior Policy Advisor for the Division of Clinical Compliance Evaluation in the Office of Scientific Investigations at CDER, will discuss whether adoption of QBD and RBQM approaches are improving clinical trial quality. Next, you and your other participants will gather in virtual breakout rooms to meet with the pre-recorded session speakers and engage in facilitated community discussions about various risk and performance management topics. Some participants will opt to take it to the next level, to roll up their sleeves and join a virtual working group to build a solution during the summit. Participants will prep for the working group by viewing a selection of pre-recorded presentations and gathering information prior to the live session. Topics to be explored in this format include centralized monitoring KRIs and QTLs. What do you measure and what's useful? Reassessing risk during study conduct. When and why? How to define and estimate IT system benefits before selection. And what are the most important questions about vendor performance that your organization seeks to answer? Finally, those of you who participated in the summit in the past, let me reassure you that the data analytics team exercise, aka the Follow the Data Trail competition, will be run at the virtual summit. Don't miss this opportunity to participate in this unique event. It's time to meet your peers, collaborate, share ideas, and think. To register for the summit, visit www.mcc-summit.com. I want to make sure you got that. It's www.mcc-summit.com. And here's the kicker. If you subscribe to the CTO podcast, remember it's free and all you have to do is click to subscribe. You can use discount code POD15 to receive 15% off your registration fee. That's right. Just subscribe and enter the code POD15 and you'll receive a 15% discount on registration. Visit www.mcc-summit.com for details today. Welcome back. So, Johann, I gave you a few minutes to think about and prepare for the rest of this conversation now about the impact of COVID. So, you guys were up and running with some customers. I assume you had some pilots, you had some full implementation of RBQM, and then COVID came. What started to happen?
Yep. And maybe then I can step one or two steps back and piggyback a little on what Artem said about, the rollout of risk-based quality management. What we see, and that sort of has been impacted by COVID as well, is that companies originally just started using, for instance, Excel spreadsheets and thought, they can handle the risk-based quality management using Excel, which may be okay to a certain extent. But in the times of COVID, companies realized that, Excel doesn't work for larger trials and that they need to change their attitude towards RBQM. And the first things that we noticed and that we got requests for is training. And actually, you might recall that at one of the last MCC conferences, the topic of risk-based quality management training was very high on the list as something that companies looked for. And so we started working on that, and that is really demanded a lot by customers, whether CROs or sponsor companies. With respect to COVID, what we noticed is that we get more and more companies approaching us because, of course, they cannot go to the sites anymore. That they means the monitors, the site monitors. The data entry is not as up to date as we in the industry were used to it. Not that it was always perfect, but at least it was okay for the most part. With the advent of COVID, the data quality, the data entry, the responses to queries, all that deteriorated. But how do you find that out? And companies realize that Syntegrity offers a suite of tools that help them to detect where are my critical sites? Where are my investigators that obviously struggle? And at the same time, looking for ways to help these sites, because, I mean, we all know that the sites are struggling and that they have probably other things on their plate than just running our wonderful clinical trials. And that produced a lot of additional requests on our end.
I want to back up to the training for a minute, because you're right. It's something that is discussed quite a bit throughout the last couple of years within our MCC groups, because it's one thing to get a system set up to track and generate information, but if nobody knows what to actually do with the information, then it's all a waste of time.
Exactly.
And so it's something I'm sure comes up with every implementation that you have with your systems.
And when I talk about training, Linda, this is not only about, risk-based quality management training in particular or in general, going through the guidelines, etc. It is more in practical terms. So what we do is that we review, for instance, protocols that our sponsor companies share with us and ask us to sort of, from our point of view, identify the risks in those protocols. And in many cases, our customers are surprised, the risk that we detect with the background, of course, of many years of looking into potential risk, the risk that we detect in those protocols, that is usually an eye-opener for our sponsor companies, for our customers. And secondly, the other request that we frequently get is prior to jumping onto actual ongoing trials, to also run retrospective analyses. So companies want to understand, how we approach the risk mitigations, the predictions, centralized statistical monitoring. And the beauty of those completed trials is that the results are already available, but they are usually not shared with us. But we run our analysis, and Artem is an expert on running those analyses and identifying the risky areas and the problematic areas in the data. And that seems to be sort of a trigger for companies then all of a sudden realizing, wow, risk-based quality management implemented early on in my trials can prevent those trials from failing. So that is what we see a lot, and a lot more than, of course, due to COVID-19.
So if I may add, from my side, I can just append what Johann has said, that COVID has naked, so to say, the problems that pharma had already in the past. That's my personal perception. So these problems became bigger, and COVID forced a lot of companies, in fact, to move towards digitalization and more technological management of clinical trials. The biggest challenge that pharma companies have, that they are not data scientists, and we suddenly had we suddenly realized, so to say, that all of us need to become a data scientist. You need to understand different approaches, different methods. You need to read the graphs, infer and make conclusions on that, and understand something about the process you don't see, you don't feel as it was before. And that's why these trainings become so vital, so that everybody gets kind of the updated skill set, how to become a data scientist. And that's why also the required technology assists us, technology which can provide, in fact, expertise in a box. For example, you don't need to study all these methods and methodologies and algorithms. You just can run them and know how to interpret this information. So that reduces the burden for many pharma companies already. Yeah, that's what I wanted to add to that.
Great. Well, that's very interesting. I think, one of the things that we hear within our groups is this concept of we need people with quote unquote critical thinking skills. And But when you sort of look at, well, what are critical thinking skills, and is that something that can be taught to people? Is that something that people just have to think a certain way? We've certainly had some debates at the consortium around that, but really are coming out on the end that yes, they're skills that can be taught, but you can't just assume implementing a system that's going to give people access to graphs is going to solve your problem. There's sort of people, technology, process triad that that's very important. And so organizations like yours that provide the technology are now having to branch out into that training side. Otherwise, people won't get the value and benefit of your technology.
I might say, Linda, what I really always amazed, for example, from my colleagues who are reading the graphs, there is a certain skill, in fact, as I would say, reading the graphs or interpreting the graphs, understanding what really went wrong when you see some spike in a certain, for example, a risk indicator or quality tolerance limit. What really went wrong in this case, and what was the trigger, root cause. So to your comment about critical thinking, I would say root cause analysis is another skill I would add to the same bucket or to the same list. It's a critical element nowadays. Not jump into conclusions right away when you see something. That's absolutely vital now. Sitting and thinking and understanding and getting additional information, additional proof. If you have, for example, some assumption, just between assumption and the real proof or real conclusion, should be some work done. So this work the people are not used to that yet, and this is what we need to learn and teach and educate ourselves, in fact, as well. So. This is a long journey to my mind. It starts with COVID, but maybe it will continue with us for a while.
Forever, maybe.
So what types of organizations are you working with? Are these services, these programs really just being implemented by big pharma? Are there organizations of all sizes? Are CROs? Kind of give us a little bit more of a sense of who's using your services and whether COVID has caused you to have an acceleration and what types of organizations are now using it more.
So I must say that we are not particularly limiting our kind of services to some type of organizations like small CROs or big CROs or large pharma companies. In the market, there is a really demand, in fact, for such systems in every tier or of different companies, creating a kind of ecosystem where everybody benefits being part of it, to my mind, open the doors for like all type of organizations. Of course, smaller organizations benefit more because they get the knowledge base from many studies right away. So, for example, in our environment, we have more than 500 studies already. And if a small organization has only one study and they connect with recording systems to our ecosystem, they get predictive analytics and machine learning, which was taught, in fact, on the 500 studies before. And that's what gives them a huge value. Large organizations, they particularly ask such question. Okay, they provide a lot of studies, and by means of these studies, our neural networks, for example, get trained. And they started to question, okay, why this IP is actually, why these neural networks are kind of property of integrity. So these kind of discussions we have with large organizations as well. So as the impact of the data that they provide is bigger than by others. However, at the same time, I personally believe that as long as we share this information with everybody back, so again, we are not sharing anything proprietary, we are sharing the risk-relevant information. That's very important to underline, so that the whole industry becomes safer. Yeah, so everything that on risks, to my mind, we're not competing on. We should be more collaborative on that. And that as long as we're sharing this information back with everybody, I think we're building this in the right way, in the right direction. So that's my personal impression on that.
And maybe, Linda, I can add to that because you asked, who are our customers? And when looking at our customers, you see academic institutions, you see CROs, you see, of course, the pharma, biotech, medical device companies, and more recently also the public-private partnerships consortia are interested in using risk-based quality management. So that almost covers every organization that deals with sort of clinical trials. And it's not only clinical trials. We are involved in a public-private partnership where real-world evidence data potentially may be looked at using risk-based quality management approaches. And I personally find that quite interesting because it already is the next step outside of this clinical trial box, phase 1 to phase 4 that we usually deal with.
Well, that's very interesting. One of the questions I have is sort of as this whole area is evolving, first of all, it's clear from our discussion that this is not just something big pharma is doing, right? This is something that's being done across the board. But, are there some new innovative things that are being done now that you've got some of that information that maybe was driven in part by COVID? I mean, we've had a COVID group that's met online weekly, and certainly there were some opportunities that we heard organizations taking of diving into their data that they had in centralized monitoring and using it to help them understand how to prioritize sites to get them up and running, when the lockdown restrictions got lifted, and ways of taking that information and sort of using it, opportunities to use it in ways that nobody had really thought of yet. Have you had that experience?
So categorization of sites, what you're referring to, is one of the first components, so to say, that pharma companies are interested in. Here, I just can quote the same thought that Johann mentioned. We are not kind of about finger pointing. We are more about helping sites who are struggling. At the same time, I would go even maybe towards the processes. And in COVID situation, some critical process got distracted. Let's put this way. And therefore, and even sites either didn't notice that or didn't put attention to that. And here we are speaking about certain processes, even looking on them, give to pharma company already very valuable input. What should be corrected rather faster, so to say, in order to have their COVID-19, for example, medication ready for submission. So in such condensed versions of trials, which we see on the COVID trials, where everything is like amazingly fast, there are some challenges to accumulate the information still with the high quality standards. And if you don't do that, in fact, there's a jeopardy for the whole study, for the whole kind of efficiency, for the whole statistical power of a study. And not to be distracted with a lot of additional procedures or maybe some sort of anxiety, on its own. To my mind, it is a challenge for sites. Therefore, just giving a right hint in the right time helps a lot, or even providing a feedback, even allowing sites to get access to such kind of interactive dashboards where they can see their own performance, compare themselves with the planned performance. Compare themselves with the plant quality or with a certain quality criteria that pharma has. To my mind, that's where the sites start improving without CRA visits. That's where we, to my mind, have really unlocked potential in a pharma. So sites are genuinely, they are willing to be good, they are willing to provide valuable data, valuable information to be part of scientific research. They're just not always aware about quality criteria that pharma has, and they're not always aware about what they have done wrong in the past. This information comes only when CRA visits them. So why is that? Yeah, they are very much interested in this information. They are willing to improve if they would have this kind of feedback loop.
Well, that's great. Well, we're almost out of time. I'm going to switch to the last segment, which we call the trio, where I'm going to ask each of you to answer 3 questions, and we ask these of all of our guests at the end of the podcast. So the first is, what's the biggest challenge facing the clinical trial industry? What's the best new innovation that you know of? And what's your top optimization takeaway? So, Artem, you want to go for it?
I hope I remember all these questions. So
biggest challenge. So
in my understanding, the real biggest challenge, in fact, for pharma is unreliability of success. So if you start a clinical trial, there is very much open question if it will be successful or not. And even though if the medication is really good, so just because of the complexity of the process, complexity of the amount of people who are participating in this project, is complicated to bring it to a success in a reliable manner. So how to make it more predictable? So this is pharma which is currently trying to understand, to figure out. I don't know, Johann, if you want to.
Yeah, Johann, do you have something to add? Or
I think the biggest challenge is that in the industry, as Artem said, the success is not given anymore automatically. So there's a lot of competition amongst the various companies out there. And the likelihood that you succeed with your drug is decreasing more and more. And maybe that I can use that to move over to the best innovation or the best new innovation. So I'm not coming from the technology side. I'm more, from the business side. So what I see lately is that pharma companies open up to share protocols, to share their library of compounds, to share their standards, to share everything that they have with other pharma companies for the greater good, and ensuring that way that the best drug really wins, and not the smartest company that sets up the smartest protocol and has the best in and exclusion criteria in their protocol. So I personally see this move towards cooperation in the industry. I personally like that a lot, and I think that is something we will see also in the future.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah.
And let's finish out with the last question: top optimization opportunity or takeaway.
Artem, I'm going to start. Is also being backed by COVID, I think. I probably complained for 25 years in the industry that our protocols get more and more complicated, that we collect more and more data, and that nobody dares to drop the urinalysis from a protocol because you never know whether you need that urinalysis. COVID and the trials with COVID tell us and show us that you can really work with a smart, brief protocol that focuses on the essentials. And I hope, this is what I really hope, that this will be fed into the next generation, the post-COVID period, and that industry will learn from what we learned from COVID, that this is something that is worth maintaining and nurturing in the future.
I would add from my side, what impressed recently me personally, when I was looking at a new endeavor from Apple, and they started their own clinical trials. And within a couple of weeks, in fact, they enrolled about 200,000 participants in their clinical trials. So that's where I believe the real potential of optimization happens, to embrace more and more wearables, to embrace more and more something which everybody has right away, and maybe breaking some sort of silos or breaking some sort of unneeded restrictions in this area. I truly believe that certain simple clinical trials could be done completely with mobile phones, for example, already getting the electronic patient outcomes registered right away there. Something where, to my mind, we could easily recruit not hundreds of patients, but thousands or maybe 100,000s of patients right away. Decentralized trials where kind of patients are taking the lead more, and involvement of patients. In fact, the patient today is much more energetic, much more engaged, and much more educated patient than patient from yesterday. And tomorrow it will be even more. Therefore, involvement and using this energy for getting the clinical trials not only done but also further promoted. To my mind, that's where pharma has huge potential today. So more and more, for example, patient-driven organizations initiate their trials themselves, fund the trials. In fact, actually, organizations, some pharma organizations got funded or got created by patients, particularly from rare diseases, for example. And they were very successful. That's just because they address maybe the topic in the right way. So, I believe so summing up, I believe that using the technology in a smart way, so having the ability to embrace the wearables and mobile technologies, as well as engagement of patient and involvement, I think that's where the real potential lays.
Well, thank you so much, Artem and Johann. I've really enjoyed our discussion. Appreciate you spending time with us today. And I know you will also be at the MCC Summit in September and are going to be presenting with some of your customers around some aspects of things we've just talked about. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank our producer, Michael Levin-Epstein. Finally, we want to hear from you. Rate us on iTunes. Are there topics we should be discussing? Guests we absolutely have to have on the show? Let us know by emailing us at lsullivan@metricschampion.org. This is Linda Sullivan, and we'll see you next time on CTO, Clinical Trial Optimization Podcast.